I'm Roger Cooley, Executive Director of the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, and want to welcome Hamsa. There you are. Lindsey with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, who are going to talk through and give a session on the Farm Bill overview and background and history and how it overlaps with sustainable agriculture and equitable food system development, and how we can collectively do some advocacy and lobbying this year to help make it as be proactive as possible to make some really positive changes, since it's going to be in development in Congress this year and hopefully being passed by the end of the year, but we'll see. But we'll hand it off to Lindsey and Hamsa. And we also have ASL interpretation who will be spotlighted throughout the morning. And then also Ashton is going to be doing visual notes as well on the side, and we'll try to show that at the end as well. So I'll hand it off to Lindsey.
I'm actually going to hand it off to Hamsa, who's going to introduce herself, and then we can get started.
Great, thank you, Lindsey. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hamsa. I am the Policy Fellow with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and Lindsey and I are really excited to be here to speak to you today about exactly what Roger told us, the Farm Bill, all that it goes into it, and all the opportunities that influence it throughout this year.
Awesome. I can get us started. Hi, y'all. I'm very glad to be here with you. My name is Lindsey. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Grassroots Advocacy Coordinator with NSAC, or the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Like Hamsa said, we're here to chat with you about the Farm Bill. So if we could get the slides, that would be great. And we can get going.
All right, 1 second.
Thanks again, Roger.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for doing the slides, Roger. I really appreciate it. So the session is called Taking Back the Farm Bill, How to Advocate for a Just and Climate-Friendly Food System this year. So we're going to start with chatting a little bit about who we are and the work that we do at NSAC. We could go to the next slide. NSAC is a grassroots alliance of 130 organizations and 100 more partners and allies from around the country that work together to improve federal food and farm policy. And we've been in existence for, I think, just about 35 years. We are comprised of, you can go to the next slide. Thanks, Roger. We're comprised of nonprofits, research foundations, any organization that is interested in sustainable agriculture. We invite them to join, and we advocate for them and their policies on the Hill here in Washington, D.C. We currently have members in about 43 states. Hamsa can correct me if that's wrong. But I believe it's about 43 of the 50 states at the moment. And we collectively advocate for all members in all 43 states here on the Hill in Washington, D.C. We can go to the next slide. A little bit about how NSAC works. So we chat with farmers and stakeholders to share their experiences, ideas, challenges related to federal policy, programs, and rules within local groups. So y'all would be farmers and stakeholders, and we're interested in hearing from you about what's working and what's not in our food systems. From there, we would then work with groups and member organizations like CFPAC or Chicago Food Policy Action Council to collect input from their farmers and stakeholders, as well as their own experiences, and they bring asks to NSAC. NSAC then, as a coalition, help members identify top priority sustainable food and farm policy issues nationwide. We set campaigns, strategies, and we campaign to win. We chat with Congress and federal agencies. We bring directly NSAC brings directly and through members priority asks to Congress and agencies like USDA, FDA as well, to improve federal food and farm policy. We can go to the next slide. I would love to get a sense of who's in the room. I saw Steph started a chat of hearing from everyone. I'd love if you could just put your name and where you're coming from and what you're excited about for the upcoming Farm Bill. Feel free to come off of mute or put it in the chat. I'll give about a minute or so to hear from folks. Let's see what Steph had put in. Lots of folks from Chicago, Loyola School of Environmental Sustainability. Ooh. Yes, I am very excited to help y'all advocate and learn how to organize. Awesome. It looks like we have everyone from students to farmers to some really cool people in the room. I'm excited to work with y'all. We can go to the next slide, Roger. Thanks so much. Keep it coming. I want to hear from you and learn about who you are and what brings you here today. So a little overview of what we're going to do today. The hope is to build knowledge, first and foremost, about federal farm policy basics, including baked-in racial justice and how our food system is inherently racist. We hope to build skills on how to take action, build our movement, and leave ready to engage in federal advocacy this coming year. Today's workshop is going to be broken down into 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be a Farm Bill history. Part 2 is going to be a little bit about the nuts and bolts and the process of how the bill actually gets passed. And part 3 is going to be advocacy and how you can get involved. So let's jump into some history. Before we begin this conversation about some really important U.S. food and agriculture policy, let's take a step back and acknowledge some really important context. Agriculture in the United States today is built on a legacy of stolen indigenous land and stolen African labor. U.S. policy has structured our system of agriculture around racial inequity since the beginning. From unfair treaties that forced indigenous people off their land to homestead acts that gave that land away to white families to farm, policy, along with state-sponsored genocide, supported the transfer of land stewarded by indigenous people into white management. Slavery upheld policies from fugitive slave laws to the Constitution, provided white land-owning farmers with immense wealth through generations of forced labor and accompanying brutality and loss of life. The use of the labor of enslaved people generated trillions and trillions of dollars for white landowners. Enslaved people themselves were barred from owning land, which denied them the ability to amass intergenerational wealth in the same way that white families did. Throughout U.S. history, federal policy has continued to actively uphold the interests of white people from these early systems that directly provided stolen resources to white farmers to those that explicitly prohibit all other groups from owning land and accumulating wealth. The use of slave labor and European farming practices on stolen land have created an inequitable and unsustainable food and farm system, which we see in the degradation of indigenous land and has led to many, many catastrophic events like the Dust Bowl. We can go to the next slide. Roger, thanks. So the first Farm Bill, one of FDR's New Deal policies, was enacted in response to the Dust Bowl. It addressed both overproduction and the resulting environmental and economic problems for farmers. Early farm bills fostered conservation and sought to balance the farm economy by paying farmers to take some land out of production, redistributing surplus food to hungry people, and setting price floors. While this mitigated the most severe challenges of the Dust Bowl era, it did not address the underlying institutional racism that started the problem in the first place. This is a lot, and I appreciate you all being here. If at any point you have questions, I encourage you to put them in the chat as well. I am going to do one last slide on history, and then we'll pass it off to Hamsa. So today, as a result of these and other systemic inequities like sharecropping and Black land theft, farmers of color are underrepresented in agriculture. Today's programs are built so that the larger your farm, the more you can benefit. And for folks of color, specifically Black folks, they tend to have smaller farms, less land, therefore making them ineligible for USDA programs. So mostly white farms means that you benefit more. And this continues to uphold the structural inequity that NSAC and organizations like CFPAC and all of y'all are trying to dismantle. I will pass it off to Hamsa.
Great, thank you, Lindsey, for that part one on Farm Bill history and context. Roger, we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So now we'll jump into part two and chat a little bit about the Farm Bill itself. We'll cover what's in it, when it gets written and passed, who actually works on it, and how it actually becomes law. So with that, we can go to the next slide. So what is the Farm Bill? Despite the picture here, it is not just a huge stack of papers. It does a lot for our farm system. It is a multi-part piece of legislation that gets developed and passed approximately every 5 years, and it shapes what we eat on a daily basis, what farmers grow, and who can access land to actually grow the food that we eat. It contains policies and funding, so it actually gives money to the programs that make our food system runs, and it has everything, including rules on who can get a farm loan, and it determines how families can get food assistance when they need it. And while it reflects the deeply seated inequities that Lindsey mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's also a huge opportunity to drive change every 5 years. So we're excited to be speaking to you all about it today. We can go to the next slide. All right, so before we talk about what's actually in the Farm Bill, we wanted to take a moment to set expectations where we think they should be, which is unfortunately a little bit low, and talk about what isn't in the Farm Bill. Because while the food system is huge and really comprehensive, there's a lot of pieces that we would generally think are part of the farm system that actually are not in the Farm Bill. So for example, farm and food worker rights are not addressed in the Farm Bill. School meals and farm to school grants, anything related to education and food is not in the Farm Bill. Women, infants, and children, or the WIC program, is not in the Farm Bill. And the other couple of programs that you see on the slide here, including FDA's food safety regulations, public land and public water irrigation rights, as well as food labeling, are not included in the Farm Bill. So what does that mean? Every 5 years when we write a Farm Bill, there are a lot of things that actually get addressed that are getting authorized. That means that they are given permission from the government to actually run programs, and they get funded, which means there's money behind all of the programs that the Farm Bill addresses. But all of the things that we've just mentioned that are here on this slide do not get those same benefits. So they're addressed in other parts of US law, but they're not addressed in the Farm Bill, even though they're connected to the food system. So it's just important to note that while the Farm Bill covers a lot, it doesn't cover everything. With that, we can go to the next slide. All right, so when we're advocating for change in a Farm Bill, it's important to understand which programs are actually in it and how much funding each of these programs gets. So just as with the original New Deal programs that we heard about from Lindsey just a few moments ago, a lot of the focus of the current Farm Bill is making sure people have enough to eat. So the biggest part of the Farm Bill, you can see here on the slide, it's that big 3/4 green part of the pie that you see there, like a big Pac-Man that's eating, is referencing nutrition programs. A lot of these programs are really critical to making sure people have what they need to eat, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, which makes up more than 3/4 or more than 75% of the Farm Bill. And this was from the 2018 Farm Bill. Now, when we focus on about approximately 1/4 that's left, that 25% that's in red, yellow, and blue here on the screen, you'll notice that there's 3 big areas that really are focused on. Just want to take a pause and make sure that folks can still hear me. Okay, getting a couple nods, so perfect. All right. Awesome. So the first piece in the last quarter that we're talking about is crop insurance. It's in red on the slide here. About 9% of Farm Bill funding. It represents the most substantial way, the biggest way that the Farm Bill puts money directly in the hands of farmers. But a close second is commodity spending. You can see that in the yellow wedge here on the slide. These are direct payments to farmers that are based on what they grow. So if you grow certain crops, you might get commodity payments. If you grow other crops, you might not get those commodity payments. When you put those two pieces together, so red plus yellow, we're talking about 16% of the Farm Bill. And most of that money is payments that go to the biggest farmers. So not your small, maybe 1-acre urban farm, maybe in Chicago, but the large, big, multiple hundreds of acres farms you might see outside of Chicago in the rest of Illinois. So while some of these payments do support smaller farmers, with insurance programs and other support, much of that money is going into the biggest pockets with the most land. Now, finally, we'll talk about conservation programs, which is the blue wedge you see here. This represents about 7% of the Farm Bill, and these are programs that move our nation's farmers towards practices that decrease their greenhouse gas effect and reduce pollution in water and help to rebuild our soil. These are the kinds of things that our Sustainable Agriculture Coalition really believes in. We love seeing farmers put great practices and really solid farming onto the land. Now, finally, we have a small wedge. It's in black, and we've called it Other here on this slide. And it contains a lot of priorities, including researching new agriculture programs and rural development and farmers markets programs. It's a small bucket of funding, but it's really central to supporting the research advances and the local food programs that make our farm system go around. Now, this 23% is kind of the farm part. The first big green chunk is our nutrition programs, and this last quarter is the farm part. All these local food programs are what we really love to see, especially in cities like Chicago. And while it does seem like a small part, the last piece I spoke about, it's 1% of the Farm Bill, but at a total of more than $400 billion, even a small wedge on this entire pie is a lot of money. With that, we can go to the next slide. Oh, I think, Lindsey, I don't think I had notes for this slide if you want to jump in really quick about these links.
Yeah, so we have 2 links here. I can put them in the chat. These are just 2 resources that we have for that NSAC has created, specifically for the value-added producer grants. Local food systems like VAPG, or the value-added producer grants, or the farmers market and local food promotion programs, like Hamsa said, are around 1% of Farm Bill spending. Does anyone actually use these programs or participate in them? I'm curious because I am doing a lot of work right now, specifically in one of our committees at NSAC, and we're looking to connect to urban farmers and some rural farmers as well that may receive grants from either the value added producer grant or the farmers market and local food promotion program.
Lindsey, I'm going to say probably more, well, I don't know, in this whole group, but I think more folks apply for the LAMP.
Okay.
But value-added producer grants could also be an option. Now, they're not, just start getting the weeds here. Is value-added producer grants primarily for rural communities, or it doesn't matter?
Hamsa, do you know?
I don't think there is a difference between rural or urban communities. I think most people are eligible to apply for the VAPG grant program, regardless of where they're living or based.
Okay, great. Looks like some folks are listing it in the chat.
Awesome. I am going to circle back to this. I wanted to make this first ask, though, as an example of what we'll chat about later in this presentation around organizing and being consistent and talking to folks. So I wanted to just share as well that the value-added producer grants are available to farmers, and I encourage you to go to this bit.ly. I will put it in the chat as well for you to go and check out, because I know Chicago has a lot of awesome local food hubs. We can go to the next slide, Roger. We'll continue.
Perfect. Thank you for jumping in, Lindsey. I appreciate you for that. All right, so we've talked a little bit about everything that the Farm Bill covers. We've talked about what the Farm Bill does not cover, and we've also talked about all of the money and the funding that is included in the whole bill. We've made our giant pie. Now, it's important to talk about the timeline of the Farm Bill and when it actually gets passed. The last Farm Bill was passed in 2018, and generally each bill lasts for 5 years. So that means that the new bill is set to be renewed this year in 2023. The current Farm Bill expires on September 30th, 2023, and writing and passing a new Farm Bill to replace the current one will be entirely dependent on Congress. So what does that mean? It means that the representatives and the senators and all of the people that work with them to develop these bills will be working throughout the year to try and create and update the Farm Bill as it exists and renew it before the end of this year. A lot of this process, though, is influenced by people like you, which we're going to get into later in our presentation. It's important to note that if a new Farm Bill is not written and passed in time, we might see what's called an extension of the current Farm Bill. So we might not entirely write a new Farm Bill, but what Congress will say is that we can extend the Farm Bill that exists right now until we have the time to write a completely new Farm Bill that addresses the current issues that we're facing in the farm system. All right, with that, we're good to go to the next slide. I do want to take a quick pause for questions because everything that's in the Farm Bill, all the money that goes into it, and the timeline of how it's written can be a lot of information. So if you have questions, please pop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them as we keep going through these next couple of slides. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, despite all of the complications of the Farm Bill, a lot of it is written by people who represent you, which means there's people that answer to you that are going to write this Farm Bill, and it's important to know who they are. Beyond just your representatives and senators, all of these people in Congress serve on what are called committees. Each committee is charged with working on a specific issue so that all of Congress doesn't have to address every single thing every single day. So some key committees to keep in mind are the Senate Agriculture Committee, which works, of course, in the United States Senate, and the House Agriculture Committee that works with the United States House. Now, they're both really important because the senators and representatives that are on each agriculture committee are actually the small group of folks that will sit together and write the Farm Bill. They'll write the first draft of the Farm Bill before it goes to the entire Congress. So we understand that you all have some connection to Chicago. At least we've seen a lot of folks from Chicago, Illinois at large in our call today. So we have an example here of Senator Dick Durbin, who is a senator from Illinois and who also happens to serve on the Senate Agriculture Committee. He will be one of the key people writing the Farm Bill this year. And that's really exciting because you all have a voice for him to hear. And so he's ready and willing, I know, because I've gone to his office and spoken with his incredible staff about everything that we can do to influence the Farm Bill and how he can best represent Illinois and its interests in agriculture policy this year. Now, it's important to note that whichever party is in power in each chamber of Congress, so either the Senate or the House, will determine who is the chair of each agriculture committee. So right now, for example, in the Senate, Democrats have the control. So Senator Debbie Stabenow, who is a Democratic senator, is the chair of the Senate Agriculture Committee and works with a number of other senators from both parties, like Dick Durbin, to develop the Farm Bill. And with that, we can go to the next slide. Great. So I had mentioned the Senate Agriculture Committee, and of course, there is also a House Agriculture Committee. We have pictures here of 3 representatives from the state of Illinois who will be serving on the House Agriculture Committee this year. Some of them are brand new to the committee, which is really exciting. One, because they are in a new learning process, just like a lot of us, which means they're hopefully really willing to hear all of your voices as they go about writing the Farm Bill this year. All right, I'll take a pause here just to go through some of the questions in the chat. I see that Morgan has asked why SNAP is included, but not WIC. That is a great question. And frankly, I don't know the right answer to that, but happy to circle back with you all. WIC is generally considered under a different policy. So Eleanor, you are right there, but the actual justification, the reason behind why SNAP is included and not WIC is a really good question. And I see a question from Ben as to why the nutrition programs have always been such a large portion of the Farm Bill. This has been the case for a while. I don't believe it's changed too much in recent years. One of the key reasons for this is that there is what's called kind of an urban-rural coalition building. So in really general terms, a lot of nutrition programs really speak to needs in urban areas, and a lot of the commodity farm conservation programs generally speak to needs in rural areas. That's a really broad generalization and not at all the case for everybody. But what happens is when you have nutrition programs paired with farm programs, one, we're addressing how the whole food system works together. And 2, it allows people from all different kinds of communities across America to come to an agreement on how the food and farm system should work together. So that's generally why you see these 2 programs paired together. Nutrition programs are also serving a huge population of people. And so they generally take up a lot more funding space in the Farm Bill, but that's generally why those 2 things are paired together. All right. And I see there's a question about NSAC's role. We're going to be talking about that and how our advocacy works a little bit later, so I'm going to save that question for a little bit. With that, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay. So just to give a quick recap, we've talked about what's in the Farm Bill, what's not in it, how it gets written, who's actually writing it, and now we're going to talk about how the whole process actually comes together. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a year in which we need to write a new Farm Bill. And so how every bill kind of starts is that a certain committee will come together to write it. So first, each agriculture committee, the Senate Agriculture Committee and the House Agriculture Committee, will draft their own versions of the bill. This happens with almost all laws that are written. Each chamber, so the House and the Senate, will write their own versions of bills, and then they'll come to a bigger conversation about actually passing a law. So that's how the Farm Bill starts as well. Once the individual committees write the Farm Bill draft that they have, they'll bring it to what's called the floor. That means the entire Senate and the entire House now have an opportunity to debate, to change, and vote on a final version of the Farm Bill, one that represents all of the House's interests and one that represents all of the Senate's interests. Now, because these are two different bodies of people, there are likely going to be differences in what they include in the Farm Bill. That's where what's called a conference committee comes into play. Each chamber, so the House and the Senate, will send a group of their own representatives to the conference committee with their two separate versions of the Farm Bill and try to work through the differences. So, for example, the Senate might say, we want to give this program $10 million. And the House might say, we want to give this program $8 million. So the conference committee might try to negotiate and agree on, okay, we can give this program $9 million. That's a simple example, but that's essentially what the conference committee is doing. They're taking two versions of a bill and trying to work it into one. Once the conference committee has a final single version of the Farm Bill, they will go back to the Senate and back to the House to vote on the final version. Now, what we hope will happen this year is that both the House and the Senate will vote yes on the Farm Bill. Once that happens, each House will send that final version of the Farm Bill to the President for his signature. Now, that's a very simplified version of what actually goes on, but it gives you an idea of how much work goes into each process and how many people are working on the Farm Bill throughout an entire year. All right, with that, I think we're good to go to the next slide. And we can move into part 3. I will say again, I know that was a lot of information. Understanding the entire Farm Bill, who writes it, and how the process works is a lot. And so if there are continued questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. We do also have time for questions at the end as well. And I'll pass it back to Lindsey.
Thanks, Hamsa. That was a lot. I'm taking a deep breath because I know policy can be very overwhelming and I'm feeling it a little. But I'm very glad to be with you all. And I want to chat through about what advocacy looks like this year. So like Hamsa said, everything is entirely dependent on Congress and when things get reauthorized. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take action. There's time and a place, and that time and place is now to start doing things. So let's get organized, y'all. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. If you are interested in keeping up to date with what is going on the Hill or in NSAC, at NSAC, please sign up for our emailing list. We also will have other links for you to sign up as well if you're interested in staying in the loop of what's going on here in Washington, D.C. The most important thing, though, is for you to get organized. The biggest number one piece of advice I give to most folks is to talk to your neighbor, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk about why a just food system is important to you. We can go to the next slide. Go ahead, Hamsa.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsey. So we want to first learn in terms of getting organized and getting the thing done, who represents you? And that starts with listening. We did mention Dick Durbin before, and we showed you all some of the representatives that you all have in Illinois before. And each one sits on multiple of those committees that we mentioned as well. We really value the House Agriculture Committee, naturally. Dick Durbin is on the Senate Agriculture Committee, and Nikki Budzinski is on the House Agriculture Committee, two really great people that we love to work with. But if you don't know who your senators are and don't know who your representative is, no need to worry. Lindsey has this incredible resource right here on the slide, www.govtrack.us. which will give you all the information you need just by typing in the address of the place that represents you best. So by typing in your address, you can find out a lot of basic information. You can find out who your representatives are, what political party they sit with, a little bit of a bio or basic background information about them, and what committees they sit on. That will all tell you what kinds of issues they might be most interested in. And if your members of Congress are on an agriculture committee or on an agriculture appropriations committee, that means a committee that works on funding agriculture programs, they're especially influential this year in agriculture and food policy. Even if they aren't on one of those committees, they can still be really helpful. They just might not have as much of an inside scoop on actually writing a farm bill or getting policies funded. But they can still listen to what they're supporting and what they're opposing. Because if they care a lot about your farm or if they care a lot about your city, that might mean they really care about issues that matter to you. And that's super important. So how do you find out that information? You can sign up for their email newsletter. Most members of Congress have their own website where you can sign up for that information. You can follow them on Facebook or Twitter. And by going back to that govtrack.us website, you can see recent bills that they've sponsored by different issue area. You can look at how they vote, and you can learn much, much more about their daily lives in Washington, D.C. Now, it's important to note that sometimes it might be disappointing. Your member of Congress might not be interested in the issues that are important to you, or they might actively oppose the issues that are important to you. And it can be a bummer, but if you know these things in advance, you can plan for that and work around it. And don't be intimidated or be put off if they disagree with you. If anything, this gives all of us a chance to try and change their mind and really influence how the Farm Bill happens, which is extremely valuable. We're ready to go to the next slide. All right. Now, in addition to just keeping up to date with your members of Congress, there are a lot of other resources in and around your community that can be really helpful with all of this listening. For one, Lindsey and I from NSAC are part of an organization that has a ton of resources. Our website is sustainableagriculture.net, and we have a number of materials there, including guides to understanding Farm Bill programs, regular blog posts, and other educational resources that can help you learn all the background to everything you could possibly want to know about the Farm Bill. In addition, you can join our email list, where you'll get our weekly roundup email with all the important updates from the Washington, D.C. end of Farm Bill things. You can get our action alerts, which are ways to get involved with our Farm Bill advocacy. And I think Lindsey will be posting that link later in the chat for people to get involved. Great. And in addition to all the resources that we provide at NSAC, there's a lot of wonderful food policy journalism that happens out there. FERN, the Food and Environment Reporting Network, has an Ag Insider daily email. Politico's Morning Agriculture email is a great way to understand what's happening in Washington, D.C. And CivilEats.com is an incredible reporting network that talks about a lot of food systems issues that don't always get the brightest light shed on them. It's also important to note that there are resources in your local community, whether you're engaging with a group of individuals like the Chicago Food Policy Action Council or going to a local extension office, which might be attached to a university in your region. All of these places can offer information, resources, and community in addressing Farm Bill issues. I think we're good to go to the next slide. And finally, establishing great connections with your members of Congress. We call these our 4 S's, the really big important things that you can always do to make strong connections. 1, shake hands. Whenever there's an opportunity to meet a member of Congress, introduce yourself to their office staff or to the member of Congress themselves. Sometimes this can be intimidating, But one thing that my family always told me is these representatives are there to represent you. They are not doing what they do without your influence and your voice. And you all are powerful people, and by introducing yourselves, they know what you stand for. Next is to send invites. How do you get in front of a member of Congress? Invite them to your party, invite them to your farm, invite them to your food event. The members of Congress and their staffers love coming to these events to know what the people that they represent are doing on a daily basis. So if you have a workshop like this one, or if you have a field day coming up, invite them and let them know how engaged and involved you want to be. Next, share news. Did you win a grant recently? Have you won an award? Let them know. These kinds of things are things that members of Congress love to talk about in Washington, D.C. When they can see a program benefiting their region, it's something they're really excited to support. And finally, show up. Whenever there are town halls, including those with your member of Congress or their staff, if there are listening sessions or what's called a constituent coffee, where you get to talk to your member of Congress, get some drinks, get some treats, whatever it might be, make sure you show up, creating the opportunity to be there, not only to show your support for some of the policies that they might have worked on in the past, but to advocate for the policies that are important to you. It makes them know that you are engaged and you care about how they represent you. And with that, I think we're good to go to the next slide.
Thanks, Hamsa. Y'all, isn't Hamsa great? I find her very delightful to work with. So like Hamsa said, the number one thing that you can do as constituents is to learn who your members of Congress are and then talk to them. I think the most important thing that is very undervalued is a simple call, a voicemail. Just putting a voice to a name can be very impactful and very powerful, and it can definitely help you establish a relationship with your member of Congress, especially if you live in Nikki Budzinski's or Eric Sorensen's district. I believe they are new representatives, and I think the sooner that you reach out to them, the better. It's never too late, and I think the perfect time is now to give them a call, send them an email, and start establishing those relationships. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Lindsey, how do I do that? I'm just a farmer. Like, they are people in power. I think something that's important to emphasize is they are here to represent you. And I like to frame it as like, you're their boss. You tell them what to do. You tell them what you need. You tell them everything that you have and what can make your life better. You put them there, so they work for you. We can go to the next slide. What else can you do? Share your story. It's very, very powerful, especially when it comes to the food and agriculture system. It's very, very powerful. You are a unique human and individual that brings something very delightful to the table. And it's likely that they want to hear from you. What's working on your farm? What's working for your business? What's not working? What do you need? What do you hope or dream for? What are things that they can do in Congress to help make your dreams a reality? This sounds a little too like inspirational for me at the moment, but I do want to say, like, there's nothing less valuable than you sharing your story with your neighbor, your friend, your family, your member of Congress. Get to know your member of Congress. I think this is something that I know I personally have struggled with in the past. I am usually very intimidated by politicians. And I think reminding myself constantly, they actually work for me, has been a great, hopeful, and helpful reminder, because at the end of the day, we put them there. Y'all in Chicago voted them in office. It's time that they work for you and that they show up and that they listen to you and share your story. It's important that you share your story, and it's important that invite them places, invite them out, get to know them. They are humans too. They are humans too. We can go to the next slide. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, okay, I can reach out to them, but what do I say? Think about your story. Why should your legislator care? What do you have to say about this issue? A very simple script that I like to use when I'm contacting my legislator is, I added it below, and it's just introduce yourself. My name is Lindsey, and I'm a constituent in your district. I'm calling to ask you to prioritize funding for farmers in the next farm bill, support programs like the VAPG program, co-sponsor the Agriculture Resilience Act, and share why it's important to you. Oh, I saw the chat. I appreciate all of the love we are getting. I definitely, I love this work. I think the most important thing that you can do as well is to take action. So I will put a link in the chat right now. And if you're interested in receiving further communications from NSAC, sign up. Share your name, your email. We need to know the address you live at, or your voting address, just so that we can send you to the right places and the right legislators to contact. And we have these two programs called Action Alerts and Weekly Roundups. So Action Alerts are action alerts. They're very pretty self-descriptive in that people, me, sends you an email and says, "Hi, Hamsa, I see that you're interested in the Agriculture Resilience Act. We have a sign-on letter that we would love for you to sign on to show your support. Will you take action and sign on?" So that's like an example of an action alert. In addition, we send action alerts when we write our Farm Bill platform, for example. We sent an action alert to let you know, hey, NSAC just published our 2023 Farm Bill platform. Will you endorse it? And so if you're interested in getting action alerts or calls to action, please sign up. We also have the weekly roundup that Hamsa writes. Hamsa, you could speak more about it if I don't do it justice, but the weekly roundup is pretty much your weekly recap of everything going on here in DC and on the Hill related to food and agriculture. Everything from hearings that may have happened this week to any interesting blog posts or anything fun related to food and agriculture, that would be included in the weekly roundup. And I believe that's sent every week. Yeah.
Yes, every Friday at noon Eastern, unless our office is closed. There are times when we're all working really hard and we take breaks. And so it's not every Friday, but almost every week you'll get an update from us with exactly what Lindsey mentioned, kind of our recent blog posts, our breakdown of the important issues going on, important events happening in Washington, DC and around the country related to food and agriculture policy, some important news articles and other media that are related to food and agriculture policy, and a couple of fun things as well for you all to get to know our community and just to put a smile on people's faces every Friday.
Yes, thank you. And I think the most important thing is to get organized. Join and follow organizations like the Chicago Food Policy Action Council, like the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. The Savannah Institute, I believe, also works in Illinois. There are tons of great Illinois food and farm and agriculture organizations out there. Find one that interests you and that works for you and get involved. Build community with each other and use that community to talk to your members of Congress. We can't do it without you, and we definitely need all hands on deck when it comes to the upcoming Farm Bill. So with that, I believe we have about 5 minutes for questions. That wraps our presentation.
Great, thank you guys. We can do about 10, 12 minutes of questions.
Oh, perfect. Even longer than I remembered.
Great. I can get us started. I know we had a couple of questions in the chat that I want to make sure we answer. So one question we got asked, is the primary function of organizations like NSAC in terms of the Farm Bill to advise our representatives who actually write the bill? And what part do organizations like Farm Bureau play in this process? So that's a great question. And Lindsey, I'm sure you can speak to this as well. So I'll get us started, but if you have anything to add, please jump in. The primary role of NSAC, we do a couple of different things, but the major thing that we do is we're representing our 130 plus members here in Washington, D.C. In general, all of our members share values around a sustainable, just, and fair food and farm system. And we are representing those interests that all of them share here in Washington, D.C. with representatives, just like the question asks. We go to the Hill and talk to a lot of Hill staff about the priorities and the important aspects we want to see in the Farm Bill and in the yearly budget that the United States has. And we do that by cultivating relationships here in Washington, D.C., working with a lot of partners and allies in the food and farm space, and by getting input from our members. Farm Bureau plays a similar role. They also represent lots of different farmers. They have their own set of values and policies that they fight for, but we're all doing similar work here on the Hill. And Lindsey, you're welcome to add anything to that if there is anything.
No, I mean, you said it perfectly. We work on behalf of our members, and our members are the ones that tell us what's going on the farms, what's going on in communities, and where we can plug in and best help advocate on the Hill.
Great. And one of the other questions we got in the chat was, does NSAC have a template letter we can sign and send to our Congress members? And I know that our grassroots team, where Lindsey works hard every day, are stellar folks when it comes to templates and toolkits and all the other ways to get involved with members of Congress. So I'm going to throw this one over to her.
Yeah, so I will say to sign up for our action alerts, because all letters, all materials, all templates, all call scripts, anything that you may need usually gets sent out through action alerts as well. So if you sign up, you'll get you will get an email from me and it will say like, hi, Hamsa, like, please sign on to this. And you can copy and paste any language that you want and use it to send to your letters or to your members of Congress. So sign up for our action alerts, please. Our grassroots team works hard every day to make sure that we are advocating not only for our members, but for communities that we are a part of. And so we want to make sure that like we reach as many people as we can as well. So please sign up to the our action alerts as well as the weekly roundup.
Yeah, just to second what Lindsey mentioned, our grassroots team works incredibly hard to make all of this information that requires multiple deep breaths in multiple minutes, really accessible and creates resources in a way that helps everyone get involved. So we're really grateful to have them. And if you sign up, gonna put another plug in there for that. If you sign up for our action alerts and the weekly roundup, those are the best resources to get regular updates on how to get involved. We have another question here. If we could speak to NSAC's farm credit reform recommendations, how they're being received on the Hill, and what the strategy is to mobilize grassroots support. We actually have an entire policy staffer, his name is Billy, who dedicates much of his time and energy to farm credit reform. I personally do not know the most recent updates on that, but happy to make the connection and find out from him. And Roger, maybe we can be in touch about how to get that information to your folks, but happy to follow through on that. Lindsey, in terms of strategizing to mobilize grassroots support, would you have anything to say about that?
So similar to Billy, who is our awesome crop insurance and commodity policy staffer, we also have our grassroots side as well. Her name is Kelsey. Kelsey is the grassroots side of things for crop insurance and commodities. So any commodity information we get from Kelsey and Billy. So we can circle back and I will make sure that we get your information from Roger and I can reach out and answer that question over email. Thank you all for sharing this space with us. If you are interested, if you have further questions, comments, literally anything at all, I love talking to people. Please reach out. My information is on the slide, as well as Hamsa's. Sign up for our action alerts, sign up for our emails, follow us on social media, and get involved. Stay involved with Chicago Food Policy Action Council. They do some awesome work. Illinois Stewardship Alliance, Savannah Institute. There are tons of organizations that work in Illinois. And find one and join. It's great, and it's a great way to start building community with other food and farm advocates. Thanks so much for your time, y'all.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I was fortunate enough to go to the NSAC winter meetings. Was it just last week? In DC, and was able to do some cooperative advocacy lobbying with our partners, Illinois Stewardship Alliance and FACT, the Farm Animal Concerns Trust, and Slow Food, with several of our representatives, including Senator Durbin. I know folks went to Badinsky, Sorensen, Miller, and I believe and Rep. Kelly and Kasten. So we were able to talk about a lot of these programs. And there was, even with Representative Miller, there was a lot of great support for a lot of these programs, with a real recognition that as they talked about earlier, many farmers and producers have no access to a lot of the programs that exist. So this has created, so it's really important that there's reforms that create a lot of opportunity and programs and resources for producers. Agriculture Secretary Vilsack spoke to our group last week, and one of the things he really emphasized was that last year was a record year for farm revenue, but only 50% of farmers made profit off of their farms, and 85% of producers have to have off-farm income, which means they have extra jobs to actually make money, to actually basically subsidize their pursuit of farming. So there's a lot of opportunities, and if we're going to make this a really viable resource for not just our outcome for rural producers, but as well as urban producers, there's a lot of work to do on supporting the Farm Bill. We have our own Farm Bill call group that we're support. Steph, should they email you if folks are interested in those local conversations?
Yes. Shoot me an email. I will put my email in the chat. To join the Rhizome group. It's a Google form. And then through that, you'll get access to all of the different calls we host, including the Farm Bill one. So yeah, shoot me an email.
Great. Well, one that, Ashton, if you're up for it, if you could share your screen just so folks could see the full, I made you a co-host, the full board. And then wanted to give thank yous to Janie and Nicole for their ASL interpretation, and Felix for his support on Spanish interpretation. Take a look at this, and then we'll do a quick poll before everybody takes off. Actually, I'll get that started. Yeah, Ashton, we're not quite seeing it yet. So if folks could give their feedback in this poll, that'd be great before everyone takes off. Just so we're always trying to improve these sessions for next year. I think I'll just spotlight her. There we go. So great. Lots of awesome information and notes and ways to think about this work, all condensed into one amazing photo image. We'll definitely be sharing these. Again, thank you all. Our next session will be starting at 11:45, so in half an hour. So looking forward to the next group of sessions today, and reminders that we'll be in person tomorrow. Again, thanks for everybody, and looking forward for more energy around the Farm Bill this year and really hopefully making some transformative changes. All right, thanks again, Hamsa and Lindsey.
Thanks all. Get involved, talk to each other.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for giving us the space to share with you this morning. This was a great morning into afternoon for us here on the East Coast. So thank you all for the company, and we're excited to see all the awesome change we can make in the Farm Bill this year.
Great, bye.
Thank you.